Okay, I'll try again. I apologize. It appears that I must have been muted by mistake, so I'm sorry that everyone was not hearing me. There's a few people who are joining as we're going along, but this is the Grants 101 webinar for beginning grant seekers, and some of you may be at different stages of beginning, so if some of this is repetitive, hopefully it's useful repetition. Let's see, I am recording the webinar, so for anyone who wants to refer back to any of this, we will be posting it at the Office of Sponsored Programs webpage, and that can be found on EGO. If you log into EGO and go to the bottom right-hand corner of that page, scroll down to the bottom, there's an option for faculty resources, and one of the choices there is the Office of Sponsored Programs page. That's where they've placed it. So this recording, both the audio and video, will be recorded there for you to refer to. The second thing I wanted to point out, and you probably can tell, is that all of the attendees here have been muted. So if you have questions, which you've already noticed, you will have to type into the chat box. And there aren't too many, so I hope I'll be able to get to everyone's question pretty quickly. It's a rather small group, but please feel free to ask me questions at any point. I have my email address on the front slide that you should be seeing right now, and hope that that's visible to everybody. Unless there are any questions about what we're going to do, I'll go ahead and get started. The agenda for today, and I do anticipate that we may not need a full hour and a half, but we will take as many questions as you have up to that point. I want to go through the role of the Office of Sponsored Programs, what we do, how we can help, and of course, if there's anything that you don't see there that you think might be helpful, please feel free to suggest it to me either now or later. I'll talk about what you should do first if you're getting ready to think about seeking a grant or look for a grant. I'll talk a little bit about the universe of funders and some ways that you can conduct a funding search. I'll talk a little bit about different types of proposals and different formats for proposals. And then I'll get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of proposal writing. And this is really going to be an overview, but I will go through the various parts of most proposals. A few points about building a budget, which many people often have questions about, and a little bit about selling yourself as the author and the director of the project that you're proposing. I'll have a few tips and tricks from what we might call either the art or the science or both of grant writing. And then, of course, I'll take questions at the end or at any point along the way that you find there's something burning that you need to ask. Please feel free. Okay, to start out, the role of the Office of Sponsored Programs, and this first point is bold because it's rather important. The Office of Sponsored Programs, specifically at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, is the office that needs to be the central clearinghouse for all sponsored programs activity. That means grants, contracts, any proposal that's submitted for funding to an outside organization. And the reason for that, or there were several reasons for that. First of all, most grants or contracts are made and awarded to institutions, not individuals. So an institution has a legal and a fiscal responsibility for those funds. So of course, the institution needs to know what funding is being pursued so that we make sure that the processes and the infrastructure are in place, and also that there's nothing legal or regulatory involved that we can't handle. There are also maybe some opportunities where only one or a few submissions from the Chicago School can be submitted, and it looks very bad if we inadvertently submit too many applications rather than nominate the ones that we need to submit. And we are working on a policy and a mechanism specifically to determine what we'll do in that situation and make sure that the most appropriate proposal or proposals get submitted. But we need to work with you. If you're thinking about submitting a proposal, we need to work with you and we need to know about it. For the students on the line, student scholarships and sometimes fellowships may not necessarily be submitted, be awarded to the institution. They may be things that where the money is given to you directly, but we still would like to know because number one, we want to be very proud of your accomplishments when you get those scholarships, and we also want to help you in the process of preparing the proposals. So lots of reasons why we ask that you work through me and the Office of Sponsored Programs if you're preparing a proposal. We work with faculty and staff and students developing ideas for projects. I got a question about alumni, and it depends on the program or the project, but there may be some cases where we may be able to help alumni with projects that are directly related to the Chicago School. So certainly anybody working on a Chicago School project, we want to work directly with you. We can be a sounding board for initial ideas, even if you're only in the very early stages, to let you know in general if your idea sounds like it would be of interest, where the gaps might be that you might need to address before you even start putting together a proposal, so that you really target your energy as wisely as you can, since we all have limited time. And I'll talk a little bit more about those initial steps in a couple minutes. We obviously will work with you on identifying the funding universe for your project, and that may involve thinking through people you already know, as well as people that funders and other people that I may know or our office may know. And we can help you perhaps connect with collaborators or other connections that may make your proposal stronger. So we also can help you, and I'll talk about funding searches, help you conduct a more mechanized or formal funding search where you might use databases and things to look for funders. And we work with you to understand what the requirements of different funders are, and often announcements and websites and things that you might be reading are complicated, particularly if it's a federal, state, or local government funder with lots of regulations. So please, if you're at that point where you have identified a funder and need to get through all the guidelines before you can write a proposal, let us help you decipher them and focus in on what the funder really wants. In addition, in the next stage, we can work with you to develop the strongest possible proposal itself. And we really are happy to work with you through drafts of proposals. We may be able to also contribute institutional information that you need so that you don't have to go searching for that. Material from other proposals that may have been submitted. Nothing is ever wasted when you're writing a proposal. You'll find, if you begin to do this over and over again, that you'll use much of the same information multiple times. Some of the information that is truly what I'll call boilerplate, where it's very general information about the institution. We're working on getting that posted on the Office of Sponsored Programs website, so you wouldn't even need to call us. You would just have a place that you could go and pull that information down. And again, for anyone who joined us, I was getting through my introductory remarks. The Office of Sponsored Programs website is in the beginning stages, but it is publicly available to Chicago School faculty, staff, and students from the EGO site. Go to the bottom right-hand corner of the page and look for Faculty Resources, Office of Sponsored Programs. In most cases, the Office of Sponsored Programs and one of representative of the office submits the proposal on behalf of the institution. And again, this is in most cases. In the case of student scholarships and sometimes fellowships, occasionally awards or things like that, there may be a reason why something would be submitted directly by the person who wrote it. But it does often help for the funder to have a central point of contact at the institution. And that also allows you to not have to keep track of any receipts, responses, follow-ups, things like that. You would always be copied on anything that I would be involved in or submitting, so that you, as the lead on the project, would be aware of everything going on. But it may also have need to have an institutional authority or submission point. There are many electronic submissions where there is only one or maybe one or two delegates for the institution, and that would be the Office of Sponsored Programs for most of the electronic submission systems. So when you get to that point, you can worry more about that, but just to know that that is one of the things that we typically do. And then at the happy end of the process, when you get the resulting grant or contract, we're happy to work with you as you manage the funding that you get and the program that you plan, so that everything works out to everyone's satisfaction, both you and the funder. I'm not going to talk too much about that part of the process, but we will help you with tracking, reporting, coordinating with the financial offices and other offices to manage the grant. Okay, so if you are thinking about seeking a grant, what do you do first? And I really recommend that you do a lot of thought work before you really start writing, or maybe you do some sort of informal scribbling and writing some of this down, but that you really think through your project and don't necessarily try to write a proposal, but just make sure that you know the answers to all or at least most of these questions, such as the goal or the mission of your project. What do you want to accomplish? What's the big picture that you're working on in the world? And what needs to be done first? What do you need to do first? And that may involve a planning phase. There may be things that you need to do either to gather pilot data or to convene a group of people to do some planning. Or is everything in place and you can jump right into implementing whatever the project is? You want to think through all the activities that need to occur in order for you to have success with what it is you want to do. And this is kind of the who, what, where, when, and how part of the thought process. What are all the things you need to do? When will they happen? Over what time period? In what sequence? All that kind of thing. And who will be doing each of them? Is it just you, or are there other people involved? And who will be associated with which parts of the project? And then just in very, very broad terms, how much each of those activities would cost. And if that's a question of salary, how much time is it going to take, and about how much of that time, how much of that salary for that time. If you're a faculty member or a staff member with students involved, what's the cost of the work for the students? If you're a student, obviously the cost of your tuition and living expenses or research expenses, things like travel that you need to take, specific particular supplies that you need. Just try to think through all that. And I know that sounds like a lot, but I'm really just asking you to make sure you have that all in your mind up front before you start jumping into trying to write something in a formal proposal. And in fact, really before you start thinking in terms of who the funder would be to fund it, because it gives you a sense of the scope of your project and a very broad idea of the cost. And that will help me help you to find a funder, because of course different funders fund things at different levels. I've known people who've done sort of this initial thought work in terms of sort of a flow chart or almost an organizational chart in some sense. And if you think if you're a graphic type thinker, that may be one way that you want to think about how this all happens. And that may seem less formal than a proposal. So don't really worry about the structure of the proposal at this point. Just worry about figuring out some of these questions. Okay, the next step will be to start to think about funders. And the reason I start with your project is I always recommend that people think in terms of what they want to do first and what the funder wants second, and then try to make a match between those two, and not, for the most part, don't try to create a project that you think a funder will fund if it's not what you want to do. It doesn't make any sense. So the overall universe of funders includes governments and public organizations at all levels. It includes various kinds of foundations. It also includes corporate foundations and corporations themselves who have corporate money that they need to give away as part of their corporate social responsibility budgets. It also includes professional organizations, especially larger ones, often have significant grant budgets themselves. The American Psychological Association, for example, makes a number of grants of small individual size, but overall they have quite a significant grant-making budget. You also, it's not on here, but you also, depending on your scope and your field, may want to consider international organizations or even governments, depending on what your project is and who your partners may be. So just a slide that shows you a few funders of the kinds of work that many people at Chicago School are involved with. And this is really a sampling, but I've listed a number of the federal funders of everything from research, in the case of National Institutes of Health and National Science Foundation, to programming in terms of Health Resources Services Administration, forensic work, Department of Justice, school-based work, Department of Education, and everything in between. And then there are national foundations with health and mental health focuses. The Ford Foundation has lots of interest in all kinds of social issues and also particularly international. The Idelson Foundation is a small foundation, but has a mental health specific focus. The Chicago School has actually approached them this year for projects, so I can't recommend them right now to you. The Kellogg Foundation, and many, many others. And the same is true at the state and local level, wherever you are located, that there will be a department or division of health, of employment, of justice, the corresponding agencies to the federal level. One of the attendees asked if you can have a copy of the PowerPoint, and the answer is yes. If I am able to get the names of presenters from the webinar directly, I will be happy to email this to you. It's also going to be, as a part of the recording, posted on the Office of Sponsored Programs website, so you can actually watch and listen to me again if you'd like to. So community foundations, if you're in California, a state level foundation, California Community Foundation. In Chicago, the Chicago Community Trust is one of many locally focused foundations. And then if you think about corporations, it's worth thinking in terms of particular sectors of business that might have interest in the work that we do. Or if you're in business and organizational psychology, it may not matter. But just some examples: insurance, pharma have some interest in mental health issues. So just to give you an overview, and that's, as I said, a very small window into the picture of the universe of funders. Part of what I'll do, of course, as people come to me with ideas, is to start to think, well, which part of this sector do I think this would fit into? And I'll sort of help to steer you as we do this. But I want you to be aware of all the different directions that you can go, because there are a lot of them. Moving on to conducting funding searches. There are several ways that you can do this and several databases that you have access to. The major subscription database that the Chicago School subscribes to is called COS Pivot. That is a commercial database that we pay a subscription fee so that everyone at the Chicago School has access to use it. And I will, in a minute here, I'll try to click through just to show you the front page and what it looks like. I am offering a webinar a week from today at the same time, Thursday at 2 o'clock, on COS Pivot and using it and all the things that it can do. So I encourage you, if you're able to sign up for that. That webinar, as well as previous webinars I've done on COS Pivot, are also archived on the Office of Sponsored Programs website, so you can work through it that way too. In addition to COS Pivot, the federal government has the grants.gov portal, which includes a database of all the federal funding opportunities. And then another subscription database specific to foundations is the Foundation Directory Online. And if you need more information about that in particular, please get in touch with me. We have some access restrictions on that, but we can work with you to get what you need, either directly or from it. COS Pivot, by the way, includes all types of funders, including foundations. Basically, everything that I listed, all the sectors that I listed on the previous slide would be included in COS Pivot. So it can be a one-stop shopping place for many people. I encourage you to sign up for email alerts. One of the nice things about COS Pivot, when you start using the database and create a search that fits what you want to search for, is you can then get a weekly update of everything that is newly added to the database or updated that relates to that topic. And there are many other things that it can do, but you can sign up for email alerts for COS Pivot. You can also sign up for email alerts from grants.gov, either for a particular federal government agency or by topic areas, and it will send you everything that matches, actually on a daily basis if there's anything new. And then listservs for funding agencies, and I know there's some acronyms here: National Institutes of Health, National Institute of Mental Health within NIH. ED stands for Department of Education. Some foundations, basically many of the funders have their own listservs that will keep you abreast of anything new that they've released in terms of funding opportunities. So, so it's worth looking at the websites of any funder that you're particularly interested in and seeing if you can sign up for a listserv there to get that news and information. Any questions up to this point? Okay. To show you the front page, I have a screenshot of COS Pivot, and this is actually a screenshot of my home page, which is one of the nice things about Pivot, is that as you use it, it creates a dashboard for you of things that you've searched for, both the searches and individual opportunities that you want to refer back to, so that it just takes a couple clicks and you'll see those opportunities again. I'm going to deviate from my PowerPoint for just a minute to go straight to Pivot, and hope that this will work for everyone, and then we'll go back to some of the other topics. But I want to give you a taste and hopefully sell you on coming to the next webinar and promote that as well. And if you're not able to visit the next webinar, certainly you can also feel free to be in touch with me, and I will help you use Pivot as well. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. I will show in my webinar how you sign up, but for today's purposes, I'm going to just log in so I'm live. And hopefully you're all seeing my web browser now. And this is that live page that I had on the slide. There's, as I said, a home page, and it does provide you a direct access to opportunities that you've found in the database that you want to keep active on your front screen. So with one click, I can see a group of things that I wanted to keep close at hand, to keep in touch with. I also have a long list of things that I've tracked for later checking and reference. It allows me to share things. But let me show you a very quick search. And some of you have probably seen the Pivot database before, so if this is a review for you, please bear with us for those who haven't. You can search in multiple places. I'm just going to do a very quick search for the word psychology and show you there are 654 opportunities that contain the word psychology. I think mental health actually comes up with more than that, so it really does depend on what kind of search you want to run. But you get a list of all the opportunities that match, and as I said, you can do various things with them. You can track them and save them. You can share them with each other. You can obviously read them. There's a great deal of information about each opportunity on its opportunity page. This is a fairly brief one, but it gives you a brief view of what COS Pivot involves. So, so as not to spoil the fun for next week or to take up too much time today, I'm going to close this for now. If we do have time at the end, and there are those of you who aren't going to be available next week or just want a little closer view at COS Pivot, I'm happy to do that at the end when we get to the questions. Okay, so that is COS Pivot database, and I really hope that that no one thinks I'm trying to oversell it. I really do think it has a great deal to offer, and hope that you will all check it out and contact me if you need help and use it. Okay, so I'm moving quickly along to the next subject here, which is the format of various types of proposals. And there are many, and people often think in terms of a proposal as being a long 20, 30-page document that is going to require them to put in a lot of time to make that initial effort to submit something. And that can be true in some cases, but not always. So I do want to tell you about some of the types of formats that you may encounter. A letter of inquiry is typical if you're just starting to propose a project to a foundation or a corporate grant maker, and it's often as little as 1 page, very brief, does not have a formal budget. It may have a funding total estimate, but it's very much kind of a sales pitch, brief and catchy. And unfortunately, you may or may not ever get a response to it, but at the same time, it may be a requirement that you submit that and wait for an invitation to submit a proposal. So that can be the first step in some cases, is to submit that kind of letter of inquiry. A letter of interest is also typical for foundations and corporate foundations. It's similar to a letter of interest, but it may be more like a proposal in a form of a letter. In other words, it may be several pages, 3, maybe even 5, and may have a formal budget at the end, which would be more like a proposal in letter form or a letter proposal. So that's another format that's not directly listed here, but often a foundation proposal is in the form of a letter, and it's just multiple pages with a full budget. A letter of intent is used by many types of funders, but is also used by government funders as well as the private funders. And sometimes it's required before you can submit a proposal, sometimes not, sometimes it's optional. One thing it can do is help the funder to have appropriate reviewers available when they get your proposal, and that's obviously important for you to know that people with appropriate expertise to really understand and get what you're trying to do are available if they're reviewing it. Sometimes it's as little as a title and an abstract, and it occasionally will be the kind of thing where you'll get an invitation in response, but for the most part it's a stage where you're just submitting information about your intent. A pre-proposal is another short proposal. This is, again, also most often probably used by government funders, and this is more of a preliminary proposal or a weed-out phase, probably 3 to 5 pages, like a long letter, except not in letter form. This may or may not include a budget, and it is the kind of thing where you typically then have to wait for it to be reviewed and to be invited to go on to the next stage. And then finally, full proposals, which themselves can vary tremendously in terms of scope and length. They may be proposals for research grants. They may be proposals for training grants, where an institution or a faculty member plans a program of education and training for students and delineates what that program will involve. Or it may be a more general program proposal, where it's a program for a particular proposal for a particular project. Again, the length and scope of proposals varies. Even full proposals can be as short as 5 pages, and certainly I've seen ones that are as long as hundreds of pages, although that's fairly rare. I would say the average length is in the probably 15 to 20 page range for government proposals, and in the 5 to 10 page range for private funders. So, so don't think that necessarily you're signing up to write a 100-page proposal if you're trying to write a grant proposal. Okay. Any questions about any of these? I know there's a lot of overlap, and it's hard to speak specifically about these very general ideas, but I hope it gives you an idea. Okay, so if you're at the stage now where you have identified a funder, you've thought about your project, you know what type of proposal you're writing probably, what do you do first? And again, I'm telling you to stop before you write a word. First make sure that you read any guidelines at all that you have. Here there's some acronyms again, which I'll help you with. You probably will have a website for the funder. You should peruse that as carefully as you can. You may have what might be called an RFP, request for proposals, an RFA, request for application, a PA, a program announcement. Those are just different names, particularly that government agencies give to the announcement and the guidelines requesting submission of proposals. But those documents will have lots and lots of gobbledygook probably. You should definitely read it anyway, and keep careful track of things that you don't understand that you may want to ask me about, things that you know you need to know, underline and highlight, just like you're reading a textbook or something that you're annotating. And then there may be some more general guidelines, something that is not specific to a particular project. Say, if you're applying to the National Institutes of Health for a grant where they've announced that they want to receive grants relating to military mental health, there may be a particular announcement for that, but there may be general agency guidelines for the National Institutes of Health. And the same may be true of foundations as well. So each of these kinds of documents will give you clues as to what the funder wants and what the funder requires. And that can be things like page limits. It can be things like guidance as to what type of project they're looking for and so forth. You'll also want to look for examples of what the funder has previously funded. And that can be on the funder's website. I can also help you to find the part of the website that you need to look at. This is another place where the foundation directory is helpful for foundations because it does help list previous grants that foundations have made. Sometimes other funded programs even have their own websites or sites where you can see that a project was funded by a particular funder, and you can get some information from the not from the funder, but from the organizations or institutions that have been funded. Sometimes they even post their proposals, which is wonderful, of course. And you want to try to absorb as much as you can sort of the language and the orientation of the funder, not to change your project, but to assess how you can best make it fit. And that may be adopting some of their terminology that might differ a little bit from how you might normally write, but may mean the same thing in the end. And then last, and probably the most important thing on this slide, is that you should contact program officers, certainly anytime you have major questions, and often even when you're just sort of formulating ideas. I don't think it's ever a bad idea to contact a program officer, and some are busier than others, but many of them can give you some really valuable advice, and in some cases they'll even review abstracts and drafts and things. So I wouldn't bombard them, but you can send them an email, 5 sentences or so, describing what you have in mind as a good start. And then they may invite you to actually send, a page draft or so to follow up. So, so this would be these kinds of things will be things you should do as early as you possibly can, so that you can give any program officers time to get back to you and to be helpful. Any questions about the initial stages? Okay. If you have decided that you're definitely moving forward and you've read those guidelines, you'll want to create some sort of an outline for yourself, just to make things organized and make it easy. And the program guidelines normally will have some headings that will indicate what are the parts of the proposal that they want to see. And those would be at least the starting point for your outline. In addition to creating an outline, you'll need to determine what information you'll need to collect, whether it's needs assessment, other kinds of external data that documents the need for what you're proposing. You may need to collect data on your prior work or other people's prior work or preliminary results, or generally on the capacity of the Chicago school. And so Some of this is information you'll need to collect. Some of this may be information that Office of Sponsored Programs can help you locate. You also want to form your team, and depending on who you are and what your project is, this might include colleagues in a department. If you're a faculty member, it might be your own colleagues or other department colleagues, your department chair, your campus president, other collaborators, and students. And students can collaborate with each other as well on projects in some cases. And students, if you're applying for scholarships or fellowships, many of the same people apply. You want to have your mentor, faculty, and perhaps there's a reason to let your department chair know, but certainly you want to have faculty and external collaborators available to help you and be part of your team of writing your proposal. You don't want to be going it alone. Any questions about the preparatory phase? So the parts of a proposal, and this is going to give you a sort of overview of the general parts of most proposals. Nothing I say here should trump what the funders' guidelines say, but this, for the most part, I think you'll find that most proposals you will write will have most of these sections or most of these parts. So if your guidelines don't have any kind of indication of how you should structure your proposal or what kind of outline, these might be a good substitute for you to use. You'll have some kind of introductory section, of course. In some proposals, you'll have a full abstract or executive summary or some kind of document that will be introduction to the rest of the proposal. And it may be the last thing you write, but you also want to pay attention to what you're summarizing, because the first person who picks it up may only get through the executive summary. So that may be an introductory piece. But in the body of the proposal itself, you'll probably have an introductory paragraph that summarizes the project. And this is also the why section. You'll need to summarize the project, but you'll need to make a case for the need for it, the significance of it, and really sell your idea for the funders' money. So you have to be convincing that what you're working on is significant, that it hasn't been solved or addressed already, that it's related to the concerns of the funder, and it's something that you, as much as possible, can uniquely make a difference in doing. So this is a place where, again, the needs assessment, the preliminary data can all be helpful in making that case. So you also don't want to show that you've already done this work, because you don't make a case for needing someone's money if you can already do it. On the other hand, if you've made a dent in a similar problem, that could be great. The next section that you want to be able to state is your overall goal and objective. And you want to be able to say what this is that needs to be done in very broad terms. And this may be even in global terms or in national terms or in whatever large sets that you're working toward solving a major goal. But then you're also going to have objectives, which are going to be the baby steps toward what you're trying to achieve. And objectives are often confused with or written like activities, but they're really kind of different, and they are really the end results. In other words, they're the end, and the activities are the means toward the end. So one silly example I sometimes use is a program for a nonprofit that needs to provide used cars to clients. And so their overall goal may be to provide reliable transportation. Their objective may be to end up with 10 cars at a certain price level. And then the activities would be the actual purchase of the car, rather than the objective being the purchase process. So this does take some practice. It's the kind of thing that I'm happy to help you with, but many funders will ask you to state what your objectives are. They may call them aims. They may even call them goals, but in general, it's going to be objectives, and they all mean about the same thing. Any questions? This is obviously a very brief overview, as I said, of grant writing, and really the way that you learn how to do this is getting your idea together and starting to do it. The next part is going to be a project plan, and this might have a number of subsections, but this is the who, the how, and the when, and it includes things like all the activities. You want to have as much detail as your page limit for your proposal allows. So it's always good to work as much of this out in advance as you can. You have to be convincing about who and how and when this will happen, so that readers can find as few places as possible to question how you're going to accomplish what you want to do. You want to describe your activities logically, in chronological order, or in whatever order is most logical for the various parts of the project. A timeline can be helpful to show how that happens, and over a period of time. And you may have a chart or some other means of showing the management of activities, whether it's you who's going to be doing everything or multiple people. How is that going to be managed, and how is the time going to be structured so that it can be accomplished? The resources and capabilities section draws from the same section, because it talks about the what you have available to accomplish these activities, whether that's individuals or the Chicago School or other institutions that are involved. Are there resources that are going to be provided or that are just available? And what are the capabilities of the people who are involved? What is the background? What kinds of similar expertise or training do people have? If you're a student, in some cases you may need to know about the capabilities of your mentor and their knowledge, for example, of statistical techniques that they need to train you on, or use the particular interventions that they can help you learn so that you can be successful in carrying out the project that you're proposing to do. So, that's an important section that ties into being clear about how this will all happen. Evaluation is becoming a major component and a major criterion for many funders. And this really boils down to going back to those objectives and making sure that there are things that can be measured quantifiably or otherwise, and demonstrating that you have a plan to measure them, so that you'll know when you get the funder's money that you're using it wisely, that you're making progress, and that you're not too far down the road before you discover a problem with what you're doing. It's good in the proposal to acknowledge if you think there are potential pitfalls and that you have a plan B if your evaluation reveals a problem. So for major proposals, evaluation section can be as elaborate as a fully drawn out plan for evaluation, and even an external person who does the evaluation, evaluation instruments. If it's a smaller project, really just more informal, where you might indicate a couple of checkpoints that you want to have benchmarks for, that you think you will have accomplished a certain thing by this point, and that would be in your timeline, and that might be the extent of your evaluation. But you just do want to show that you are aware that it's important to be accountable for the funds. And then finally, dissemination, which I think is a smart thing for anyone who's writing a proposal to include, because it shows that your work will have an impact beyond just the immediate initial project that was funded. And this involves showing that you have an idea about how to share what you learned, to share what was successful or what wasn't, to form collaborations, to sustain or expand the work, to show that you have ideas about places you can make presentations or publications, networks you can join. Groups that you're already part of can also be a part of this, not just new things, but groups that you're already in a network with, that you can show that you have a network to disseminate information to who will be interested. And then finally, supplementary documents are part of many proposals. Some funders will indicate what can and can't be provided in the supplement. If they say not to include something, don't. But you'll often see a request for CVs for the key individuals involved. You may see a request for or a allowance for letters of support or for scholarships and fellowships, more like letters of reference. Make sure that obviously that these letters are as valuable as they can be, as specific as they can be. If they're offering a specific commitment of resources, that they document that as much as possible so that it supports your project plan. If your proposal indicates that someone will be supporting you in one way or another, make sure that you get a letter from them. So start early with things like collaborations and letters of support to line up who those people will be so that you can make those requests well in advance of any deadlines you might have. And then finally, appendices. And my major caution here is to just make sure that anything that's crucial to understanding the proposal is in the proposal itself and not in an appendix, because it may or may not get read. So that's another case where appendices may be limited by the funder, but if they're allowed, make sure that they are things that are useful but optional to really understanding your project. Okay, budgets. Again, this is going to be a very, very quick overview of budgets. This is primarily relevant to research, training, and project grants as opposed to fellowships and scholarships. So any students who are on the line can use this as a moment to learn about future grants they might write. Your budget for a fellowship is probably going to be dictated by the funder and might include things like tuition and possibly a living stipend, but it will generally be pretty simple, and the guidelines will tell you more or less exactly what you can request. So it shouldn't be a great worry for students. If you do have something more complicated, again, feel free to let me know. But for a larger project or a more major project, there are some typical costs, and I've listed some of them. And these are generally referred to as direct costs. And direct costs are any costs that can be specifically identified with the work of a particular project. So this might involve the personnel and their salaries, and sometimes even the fringe benefits associated with their salaries. It wouldn't include, obviously, their entire salary. If they're going to be working 10% of their time on the particular project, it would be, you would budget 10% of their salary in this case. Travel is very often budgeted if a project involves any kind of field work or dissemination at professional meetings or any other kind of travel. If it involves a large amount of local area travel, you know, daily trips to a particular site, that may be allowable in some budgets. And I said the word allowable, so I'll stop and define that. Allowable is just like it sounds. Every funder has a list of things that they will pay from a grant budget and things that they won't. There's a long list of things that are unallowable by the federal government. One of the most famous and well-known is any kind of alcoholic beverages. That's unallowable by other funders too. But there are other things that the federal government grants can and can't pay for. Private funders may have their own list, or you may need to, in some cases, you may need to find out if a particular unusual item is allowable. Unless it says otherwise, these typical costs are generally all allowable. Supplies and materials can be almost anything as long as it's truly a significant enough amount that it can be directly identified to a project. Individual sheets of paper are probably too small to include, but if you're going to need multiple reams of paper or other kinds of office supplies, that kind of thing, assessments for instruments for assessment that you need to purchase, books, you can imagine, computer supplies, all those kinds of things. Most funders will allow to be included in your budget. Major equipment, which is normally defined as individual things that cost more than $3,000 a piece, are sometimes allowable. And I said if needed and allowable because there are specific grants that may be just for equipment and other grants that may say equipment is not allowable for this particular grant. But in general, that is a typical cost in some grants. And then for student scholarships and fellowships, tuition, stipends, and maybe some other costs, maybe costs for student travel, if it's an international project or involves some other type of work that requires travel. A student scholarship or fellowship budget might include some of those costs. A training grant budget submitted by the institution and directed by a faculty member might also include some student costs for these kinds of things. So those are typical major direct costs. There are others that are less typical, but in many cases can be included. So it's just important to make sure that you read the guidelines for both what is allowable for your particular grant and for the funder in general, and contact me if you have questions figuring out whether you can include something or not. The other category of cost is what's called indirect costs. This is typical largely with federal government grants, sometimes with other funders. And indirect costs are basically a percentage of the grant that is allocated to the institution to compensate for the general costs that have to be incurred in order for the institution to operate and be able to house the grant. So things like the fact that we have to have an accounting system and accounting office to handle grants, that we have utility costs, that we have facilities costs, all those kinds of things. This is a part of the budget that you don't need to worry about. It's a formula-based. So if your grant does say that indirect costs are allowed, please let me know and I'll help you calculate what to put in that section. Similarly with salary and fringe, in terms of making sure that you have the correct amounts included for salaries and fringe. I'm more than happy to help you with that. And all of that, the major direct costs and the indirect costs, the two categories together, should, no-brainer, be equal to or less than the amount that the funder says it will provide. And this is where sometimes you have to do some work to make the numbers work. I will say that what it generally means, if you have a budget that won't fit within the total amount of funding, either means that the scope of your project was too big to begin with, or it means that there are costs really that should be shared, and that may be an option. Either the Chicago School or some other organization may be able to share part of the cost, or it may mean that we need to look for another grant for the part of the cost that can't be paid, and divide the project in some way so that you have additional costs that can be included in another proposal for a different, related but different budget. As I said before, no costs should be there if they're unallowable. Funders won't fund them anyway, but it's best to just make sure that you know that in advance and not include them. No questions so far. I think this is my last slide on the proposal parts itself, and then I have a few tips. But I wanted to talk a little bit about selling yourself, because that is a key part of almost all proposals. And you want to have a biosketch or a CV that highlights the work that is most important to what you're proposing to do. You want to make sure that you edit this carefully so that you have the most important professional and educational activities. You want to use discretion if you have a long list of awards and honors, that you don't have a CV or a biosketch that stretches on and on. If you have publications and presentations, some of the categories you might use to make sure you have the key ones listed are things that are in peer-reviewed publications. Make sure things are already published or accepted for publication, and then the ones that are most recent. And I really recommend that you rewrite a CV for each proposal so that you're really focusing on the key work in that proposal area. If you have key work in a particular area that doesn't fit my categories above, you may want to include it anyway just to show that you've done work in that area. And anyone who's a senior person or anyone who's receiving money from the grant budget should have a CV attached in most cases. So last is some do's and don'ts. Some of this repeats things I've said before, but make sure you read everything you can get your hands on and understand it as well as you can. Verify that deadline to make sure that you understand that it's 5 o'clock your time versus 5 o'clock Eastern time, all those kinds of little things that can catch you up. And you want to do all this first. You want to have an outline, as I said, and you want to make sure you're responding to every question. If there's any reason you're not addressing something, be sure to explain why and give a good rationale. But I recommend you don't avoid addressing anything. Try to respond in some way to every question as much as you can. You want to make the copy of your proposal very readable. Sometimes you have reviewers who are reading 20 or 30-page proposals in one night, and it's hard to read many pages of single-spaced copy and writing. So I try to use headings, subheadings, bullets, charts, whatever to break up the text itself. Making sure that your proposal is clear and understandable to someone as much as possible outside your discipline, and that may be one area where I can be helpful since I am not a psychologist or even a social scientist. It should be something that I can understand in general terms what you're planning to do, and that you explain things clearly. Now you may have some technical terminology that you need to include to make sure that it's clear that you're an expert in your field. But for the most part, you want to be as simple as you can in your language and as clear as you can. When you have a budget, you want to make sure that everything in the budget is justifiably part of the project, and make sure that there is somewhere in the narrative section of the proposal, somewhere in the text of the proposal, something that refers to your use of that computer, or something that is clear that you need to make that trip, so that it doesn't come out of the blue that the budget has a lot of items that aren't clearly related to what's in the proposal. And then just finally making sure that everything is clean, easy to read, no typos. If it's being submitted in hard copy, make sure you have 4 copies in an original if that's what they ask for, etc. And then the last line here refers to a table of contents. Some funders like them. Some funders don't request them, but it can be a helpful way to organize things and make sure that it's clearly designated. I think that's my last formal slide. For those of you who want to sign off, please feel free. Those of you who have questions, I'll be happy to take any questions. And I'll wait a couple minutes. And if anyone would like me to go back and show you a little bit more with COS Pivot, you can feel free to make that known. And I'd like to try to take any questions first before I do that. Not seeing any questions come up, so maybe it means everybody is happy to have the extra half hour. So that's fine too. Please feel free. I don't have anything specific other than the pivot to show you at this point. And you're more than welcome, if you're able to sign on next week on Thursday at 2 o'clock. And again, this is recorded, and so it will be available on the Office of Sponsored Programs website as soon as I can get it up there, and I'll try to email it to everyone as well. Looks like everybody may be okay for today. And yes, anyone who wants to email me directly with ideas, please feel free to do that too. Thanks, everybody who's left. I'm going to go ahead and sign off now, and hope that this was valuable. Take care.